Okay, welcome to Wealthy Warlock, and I'm going to talk to you today about a very interesting book I found that I had to go through the process of translating myself, and so it should be a little bit entertaining as we have a giggle about some of the grammatical forms that will come out and some of the random words that will be inserted here and there due to the I was using a free AI method of translating this from Mexican Spanish to English. It didn't have the capacity to go into the nuances of the different dialogues of Spanish spoken around the world, and so it was just set to automatic Spain Spanish. Moving on, the book itself is called Self-Elusive Meditation. It is all about the theory and the practice written by and researched by Jacabo Grinberg Zilberbaum from the Faculty of Psychology, UNAM, and National Institute for the Study of Consciousness. This was at the time of him writing the book. Very interesting story. What happened to Jacabo. The general index is laid out, and then it goes straight into the first part, which is the Appendix 1. Sorry, no, that's towards the end of the book there. My fault. No, it goes straight into a quick pre-introduction, and on it goes. About my own update these days, he says, "It is truly creative and destructive. I play with miraculous transformations, penetrating all circumstances, and wherever I am, I have nothing else to look for. The circumstances are no longer capable of change. If students come looking for me, I go out to see them. They don't see me. Thus, I dress in all kinds of clothing. The students immediately begin to speculate about them, taking them as my words. All of this is very sad. Blind and shaved men without eyes depend on the clothes I wear, green, yellow, red, or white. When I take them off and put on only the garment of purity, the students see a reflection and gather together with joy, and when I undress, they become disappointed and with surprise run away scared and complain about my nakedness. So I tell you, do you really know me who dresses in all these garments? And suddenly they turn their faces and recognize me." I do believe that last part is a quote by Rinzai Geigen. Moving on with the introduction. In his evolution, man has always sought new forms of development and growth which allow him to live with greater fullness, happiness, and health. In this sense, in recent years, some meditation techniques have begun to be disseminated, creating a growing movement of interest aimed at self-knowledge and the expansion of consciousness. Unfortunately, most of these techniques are provided without a deep knowledge of their psychophysiological bases and surrounded by superficial paraphernalia, linked to the need to belong to this or that school and depend on this or that teacher. The most unpleasant thing about this movement is that some schools seem to mix economic interest and sectarianism that distorts the true meaning of the development of consciousness, which, to be effective, must be freed from mysteries, subterfuges, and petty interests, and instead focus on the achievement of unity through the expansion of consciousness. Originated based on shamanism studies, the meditation technique presented here has undergone years of research, testing its basic postulates, its psychophysiological correlates, and its goodness to stimulate a healthy and natural development of brain physiology and awareness. For her, its practice does not represent any risk. It does not require belonging to any sect or lineage, and its teaching is open and without economic interests. In this book, self-illusion meditation is explained first in its theoretical basis and then in the practical procedures to activate it. Self-reflective meditation is a natural technique based on normal development processes and designed to stimulate the latter in a conscious, active way and in perfect agreement with reality as it is. Many efforts have gone into the development of this technique, particularly those of the National Institute for the Study of Consciousness, INPEC. It was precisely at the regional center of the state of Puebla of the INPEC that several explanatory seminars on self-illusion meditation were held, which resulted in the motivation to write this book. This is CONACYT is the original word. Didn't get translated. Not sure if it matches up with the dictionary of translated words. Anyway, the something collaborated by financing research on psychology, Native Mexican, which served as the basis to carry out this work. It could be like a consciousness research center name, maybe. Who knows? Anyway. It is my greatest hope that this book helps boost self-knowledge and awareness by Jacabo Grinberg. The theory behind the algorithmization levels. It would seem that the human brain has a self-correction and integration mechanism. During development, more and more information is integrated into coherent and unified systems. Human beings cannot stand mental discomfort or confusion. Instead, he likes order, inner peace, and states of balance. Since there is a growth and informational conditions and environmental complexity constantly increase, balanced brain states, to remain effective, must undergo periodic review in order to integrate new and previous information into new and more expanded homeostatic states. An algorithm is a formula, pattern, or code that incorporates information into its structure. Mental homeostatic states are algorithmic states. These balanced states are supported by the achievement and activation of brain algorithms. For a brain to activate an algorithmic pattern, it must have the anatomical structure and the appropriate coding mechanisms. In order to unify and integrate a large amount of data into a pattern that includes them, this inclusion is called self-elusive. When the pattern manages to incorporate all the brain information of the present. There are many levels of inclusion, such that one could think of the existence of a pyramid of consciousness in which each of its strata incorporates information from previous levels. The level of greatest pyramidal inclusion, the one that incorporates all the information of the system at a given moment, is the level of self-illusion. Self-illusion allows us to contemplate the common characteristic of a system. This common characteristic has been called in different ways the essence of the system, its spirit or basic character. The more information that is concentrated and integrated into the self-elusive algorithmic level, the more stable it is. Such stability means that the algorithmic pattern preserves its structure, regardless of the modifications of the information on which it is fed. There is a limit of self-elusive stability. That is, when the nutrient informational elements of an algorithm exceed a certain threshold of variation, the algorithm may not be able to maintain its structure and changes. This modification breaks the balance of self-illusion. This work maintains that there is a directional axis to development, which functions as an attractive determinant of the system, leading it towards states of greater unification. When self-illusion balance is disturbed, the system must create a new pyramidal step and a new level that will also be subjected to self-illusion when the system chooses the inclusive algorithm capable of integrating all the previous information, including that of the new level. Growth consists precisely in the search for new levels of integration and in the achievement of more powerful algorithms and self-elusive states of greater unification. The axis of development has a unitive directionality. Each new algorithmic level incorporates a greater amount of information and therefore brings the entire system closer to unity. The living systems that have evolved have done so guided by this directional axis of unification. The appearance of the atom as an integrated set of particles, of the molecule as an integrated set of atoms, of the cell, the tissues, and the entire organism, is an example of the above. Nature's experimentation to create organic forms of increasingly greater complexity and unification accelerated with the appearance of brain systems which unify information and create algorithmic sets with a speed millions of times greater than that necessary for these sets to acquire organic support. Full stop. Fixed. Full stop. That last one might be a misplaced word. Not sure. Translation, things, Quote, the neural software is ahead of the bodily hardware, although both travel along the same path, end quote. It is not possible to achieve a satisfactory state of self-illusion unless the novel level of integration that resulting from ultimate self-illusive imbalance, has been completed. That is, it is not possible to find the algorithm of a system unless it has experienced all the contingencies of its new state. This is why leaps in growth cannot be made. Drugs, for example, that in the psychedelic era activated leaps in algorithmic development failed because without them the brain systems returned at previous levels of development. The amotivational syndrome in the chronic drug addict arises as a consequence of the inability to sustain in everyday life the levels of experience caused by those drugs. On the other hand, if there were any technique that stimulated development, naturally promoting unification, algorithmic creation, and self-illusion, this technique could satisfy the legitimate human desire to place oneself in a process of significant growth aimed at achieving contact with reality. This technique exists, and it is self-illusion meditation. Hoo-ha! Yes. Okay, end of chapter. The approach to reality is the name of the next chapter. And it starts with, unification during algorithmic development is modeled on at least two brain processes, the creation of inclusive neural patterns and the development of neural fields of increased syntergy. Both processes are complementary, correlative to each other, and guided by the same axis of development. The creation of highly inclusive neural patterns supports language, conceptualization, and abstraction. The creation of neural fields of increased syntergy is the foundation of the unification experience. According to Syntergy Theory, the brain creates a field of interactions capable of modifying the structure of the space-time matrix. This alteration unifies brain activity with the rest of creation at different levels, depending upon the informational density of the neuronal field, its coherence and frequency, and that is its syntergia. The greater the syntergy of the field, the greater the unification. In turn, the syntergy of the neuronal field depends on the algorithmic power of the neuronal inclusion patterns that the brain has managed to activate. There are different levels of consciousness, each of which depends on the syntergical levels of the neural field and the algorithmic power of the neural inclusion pattern. At each of these levels, real experiences are activated, but the reality which they arise is that of total unity. The experience of unity is the experience of reality. This reality sustains all levels of consciousness and grounds the existence of any experience. An approach to reality is achieved as a greater amount of information is managed to unify. This does not mean that the process is intellectual or theoretical. Rather, informational unification to bring about an approach to reality must be lived authentically as an expansion of consciousness in which identification with increasingly global aspects is strengthened and accentuated. We are accustomed to identifying our personal identity with levels of realities that are not reality. We believe we are a body or a mind. We believe we are an idea or a theory. We believe we are our emotions. We believe we are a country or a flag. Identification with our body is the deepest and most generalized identity. Along with it, we identify with our money, property, possessions. Some of us believe we are our brain, and we think that we would disappear if it were destroyed. In reality, you are reality itself and not one of its parts or portions. This reality is what gives life to our consciousness, regardless of its contents. This reality is, at the same time, the basis of any of our experiences. One of the Eastern systems that comes closest to the study and practical activation of the experience of reality is Mahamudra. This Buddhist technique affirms that all the contents of realities are reflected by the mirror of the mind, which is totally pure. The Mahamudric technique consists of experiencing that mirror independently of the contents of its reflections. This implies not identifying with the content of the experience, but with its origin, and this is closer to reality. In other words, the meditator of the Mahamudra technique learns to focus his attention on the common substrate of all experience, on its very origin, regardless of its quality or content, This origin has its model in the highly coherent structure of the matrix lattice of space. In fact, according to the Syntergy Theory, since experience appears as in the interaction of this matrix with the neuronal field, the substrate of any experience and its very origin is the pure and unaltered state of the lattice prior to any interactive modification. This pure substrate is what the meditator attends to during Mahamudra. However, this does not mean that what Buddhism calls the mirror of the mind is this lattice, also known as the quantum field. The latter is a physical model of something that, like consciousness, cannot be reduced to the material world. At the same time, it is necessary to remember that what we call the material world, I feel like there's some sentence missing there. Next paragraph. The lattice or matrix of space is the very origin of this, its fundamental structure from which the elementary particles appear and what we know as solid objects arise and represent a limited decoding of one of many realities. Solidity and separateness is more a result of brain processing than a reality in itself. Physics has already demonstrated the dual particle wave character of any object. The limits and boundaries that appear to separate one object from another are relative to the perceptual threshold. For a fine-tuned perception that penetrated, perceptually speaking, into the atomic level, the absolute substantiality, solidity, and separateness of the objects would disappear, giving rise to the image of a whole intertwined with, it is true, portions of greater and lower density, complexity, coherence, and order of a common energy organization. Such would be the perception for an eye and a brain functioning in a shorter duration of the present than usual. Returning to this Mahamudra technique, it is necessary to consider that the approach of its meditators to reality is not total, since even the experience of living any experience from its substrate can be observed. I will talk about this limitation later. Also in Buddhism, the non-existence of object substantiality is recognized. In other words, the Buddhist affirms that no object, process, organism, or experience has absolute reality. Rather, everything is dependent and intertwined within a web of relationships. Therefore, the identification of a human being with something that has only a relative reality would condemn him to that same relativity. Now, if there were nothing capable of transcending the relative, the human condition and its consciousness would be condemned to live subject to the random fluctuations of relative events in a world that is also relative, lacking meaning, direction, and source. Self-elusive meditation considers that even this world could be observed, so the observer must belong to a reality that transcends the relative, that is, that belongs to reality with a capital R. Throughout some of this material, and at the end of this book, there's a glossary of words that he uses for more information and detail on the specific context of the words that he's using, because he's using context and words like the reality of the reality is not the reality, and you're not aware of the fact that one or more of those might be capitalized or accentuated within his type case. So that's where he's getting really specific, and that might not be coming through readily available to you as a listener. I will include the photos of the glossary in the slideshow for the video, so you should be seeing those by now. Moves on to chapter 3. Pardon me. The self-elusive experience. The self-illusion experience, that is, the observation of one's totality in the present moment, is not a passive experience, especially when the self-illusion is of the unlimited type. In other words, when the result of self-illusion is resubmitted to observation, and so on in constant and continuous process. Unlimited auto-illusion can continue until the system's algorithmic capacity is exceeded. At that time, the system must acquire new information and integrate it until it is able to decant a new algorithm that can be subjected to self-illusion. The self-elusive experience is an experience of unification that receives, therefore, the same vitalizing energy that has guided the evolutionary process. Therefore, this experience, more than passive, is ecstatic, and more than equanimous, it is one of grace, unlike my pronunciation sometimes. From a psychophysiological point of view, the self-elusive experience is explained in the same way that any sensory experience is explained. That is, as a result of an interaction between the neuronal field and the quantum field. But since self-illusion increases the informational density, coherence, and synergy of the neuronal field, it is capable of establishing a congruent interaction with a lattice level very close to the origin of the quantum field. Therefore, the resulting experience is what Buddhism calls nirvana, what Sufism calls fana, and what I know could be expressed as consciousness. Here's another bad edit. Here comes out with the words pura o yo puro, pura o yo puro. Which after a little bit of Googling with some translators, I assumed to be pure, or I am pure, from, some ideas I had might be like the pure I am of the pure I amness, the pure I of the pure I amness, or, that kind of thing. Somebody who speaks Spanish, please help me out here. On the other hand, as we continue along, although the experience of ego presence can arise in any area of field interaction, there are probably 3 main locations for its appearance. These are inside the neuronal field, in the zone itself, or edge of the interaction of fields, and in the quantum field. Intraneuronal activation is a corporal location. Activation at the edge of interaction is a localization of ego experience in the experience itself, while quantum activation is an extracorporeal location. Since I have already analyzed in some detail some aspects of these three locations here, I will only mention that the quantum position results in the activation of the double and an ability to modify physical aspects of reality. Well, that's very interesting. Moving on. Returning to unlimited self-illusion. I said before that it can continue up to a point at which the system cannot find its own algorithm. Generally, at that moment, the location of the ego experience varies from one extracorporeal position to another on the edge of the interaction, and the subject stops being an observer of his experience to identify with it. When this identification is made in areas of high synergy, the resulting experience is one of ecstasy and spiritual joy. When algorithmization is achieved, and therefore the previous state is self-referential, the system completes a new level of development and begins again its development process towards greater unification. For her, self-illusion meditation is a highly active, living, and vital technique. Self-illusion meditation increases awareness, strengthens action, and does not require confinement, silence, or even isolation to progress. It is a totally natural procedure that allows you to be in the world, although not of the world. That is to say, for the self-elusive meditator, there is no longer identification with the world, but his experience in it persists. It does not deny the experience of the world, it transcends it, locating itself closer to the observer and reality than to any reality. A good example of where he's using capital and lower. The capacity for self-illusion does not admit limits or goals. However, the progress requires willpower and personal power, and the latter to exist does not admit useless distractions or ephemeral pleasures. In this sense, self-illusion meditation is similar to Zen, which discards the idea of the existence of a final goal, considering such ideas as childish and illusory. Reality is always present for those who are able to perceive it. Preparation to perceive it may lead to the goal of establishing contact with it, but this goal does not imply that reality exists in some future that will come and that does not exist now and here. Reality is always present. It is ours to be in it or to identify with some specific aspect of it. This last identification, because it is temporary and finite, has death as its destination. Instead, the observer and reality survive. One of the Buddhist techniques most similar to self-illusion meditation, Vipassana, teaches its practitioners the art of observation, leading the most talented to even the possibility of observing the process of their own bodily death, presumably surviving it. Self-illusion is not analytical observation, nor should it be confused with what might be called superego observation, in which the internalized cultural portion of the personality judges one's behavior, judgments, and thoughts from a platform of critical analysis. Self-illusion is direct and does not require mental or cultural intermediaries. Furthermore, these intermediaries are part of the observation contents that will ultimately be self-referring when integrated into an inclusive algorithm. For the above, the observer is not the Freudian superego, nor is it a zone or level of the mind as Buddhism mistakenly maintains. The observer is the guide of the process and, like reality, is always present, witnessing the contents of the mind. Chapter 4. The shared mind. Pardon me. The shared mind and not private. The thoughts and state of consciousness of a subject are communicated directly to other subjects. The mind, in reality, is part of the same interaction of fields from which sensory experience arises. Therefore, the content of the mind is inscribed in the same lattice of the quantum field, of which all neuronal fields are a part. When I know myself, contents that belong to other lag minds with which relationships are maintained are inevitably observed. At a certain level of self-illusion, the personal ego is diluted, and the only thing that persists is the act of observation. Transcending the conditioned personality, it is not a disappearance of individuality, but rather its expansion. In more advanced stages of self-illusion, the closeness to the unity begins to become evident. The act of observation incorporates the same hyperfield nourished by the neuronal fields of an increasingly greater number of beings. In reality, the shared mind is the same mind from which the individual emerges. Its basic substance, the quantum field, does not admit owners, and thus every path whose direction approaches the unity must face its existence. In that instance, there are at least two possibilities of choice. On the one hand, the acceptance of one's own identity as capable of including the whole or the rejection of the other, considering it as essentially foreign to one. In the first case, the path leads to the disappearance of the ego and unity. In the second, separation and isolation are activated. In self-reflective meditation, it is essential to learn to accept. Any content of your mind, regardless of its origin, is part of consciousness, and this is part of the unity which one intends to live. For her, self-illusion without acceptance is impossible. From another point of view, algorithmization only proceeds when the information is accepted. If certain contents are rejected, those that are considered alien and coming from other minds, for instance, and others are accepted, like those that are felt to be their own, the algorithm that is chosen will be at most partial and incomplete, and the self-illusion of the entirety will not be able to prosper. Acceptance, however, does not imply identification or conformity. It is accepted to transcend and to transform, not to limit and identify. The objective self-illusion is to reach one's own being, the one that includes everything but is not identified with anything, the one that can observe everything but that cannot be encompassed by any material, analytical, or intellectual scheme. Sir Aurobindo once said that reality was like a clear sky free of obstacles through which thoughts pass like birds. These travel from one end of the sky to the other without leaving a trace, without altering the balance of empty space, without dirtying the atmosphere. Self-illusion requires acceptance to allow the contents to flow without blockages, without creating tensions, so that identification with any of them does not prosper, to keep the reality of heaven free of dirt. Self-illusion is only a technique that allows an approach to reality as never an end in itself. The goal of self-illusion meditation is reality, but it cannot be described or explained. When the contents of any experience are accepted while maintaining the attitude of observation and self-illusion without limits, contact is established with reality. The reality. There is no body or mind or anything to self-refer to. There are no thoughts that disturb the state of pure limitless existence. Everything is part of the same thing. There are no sections or levels, only peace and existence. Everything vibrates and is vital. Everything produces love and belongs to the same being, and he is me and I am him. It is constantly created, but there is no separation between creator and creation, and everything is one. The arrival to reality is unmistakable. There are no doubts or analytical considerations nor questions. It simply is there. Although it cannot be located anywhere, In reality, everything is unified, but the existence that is experienced cannot be reduced to unity. That one is beyond her, and at the same time it is in her. It exists. It simply exists. It is also totally natural and simultaneously totally amazing. Actually says that. I added the emphasis. There is no unconsciousness, no matter, no objects, no separate people. They are all the same being, and this is one. But it is not amorphous. It exists in total balance and love. It exists in peace and beyond thought. It is the reality. Part 2, as we begin the section on the practice after we've completed the theory. Although I suspect this would constitute the theory of the practice. Anyway, it continues, and the chapter name, I do believe, is Strengthening Attention, Anapana. The practice of self-reflective meditation is based on observation and, to be effective, involves strengthening attention. To consider that attention is the fundamental tool, this chapter is dedicated to its management and strengthening. Any object or activity can be used to strengthen attention, but among all, the body itself and respiratory movements are the most appropriate. Buddhism calls the maintenance of attention on the latter anapana, respiratory movements. Focusing your meditation on your respiratory movements equals anapana. In all attention exercises, the natural limits of the system must be respected. It is suggested to use cycles of approximately 20 minutes, gradually increasing the duration of the exercise or starting at less, I might add, as an addendum to the material. Start in a quiet place, free of insects and well ventilated. It is advisable I hope it's available too, to sit comfortably, preferably in loose clothing and with a half-empty stomach. Once seated, you close your eyes and pay attention to the entry and exit of air from your own lungs without forcing it and trying to keep the breathing rhythm natural and calm. And a side note, if you get caught up in this material by focusing on things like, well, how am I meant to tell exactly when I've got a half-empty stomach? It's not literal, okay? Just focus on the message being correlated here and not your internal blocks coming up. For a few minutes as we continue on, the practitioner will pay attention to his breathing, trying to feel with increasing detail the passage of air inside the nose, the filling and emptying of the lungs, the associated temperature changes, the accompanying body sensations, the position of his back, etc., etc. The goal of this first exercise is to maintain attention without deviations and without losing detail of the respiratory process for 20 minutes. To achieve this, it is necessary to practice several times a day, increasing the duration of the exercise each time. When the above has been achieved, it is advisable to extend the periods and practice the exercise with eyes open and in the midst of daily activities. In other words, it is intended that attention be maintained during daily life and not only during special quiet time periods. Other attention exercises during daily life are sustained observation of one's own body. The practitioner is recommended to keep his attention on his body, observing the feeling of different postures that it adopts in different circumstances when walking, sitting, standing, lying down. The longer the period during which the practitioner is able to pay attention to his or her own body, the more easily he or she will be able to activate self-reflective meditation. Another attention exercise that is advisable is the perception of the shape, colors, and textured details of objects without judging or analyzing their meaning, importance, usefulness, or name. In this exercise, the ability to attend directly and without intellectual mediation is strengthened. In addition to the above, this exercise allows you to achieve fresh and vital access to perceptual reality. Saucy. The practitioner must use these exercises daily and for as long as possible. Ideally, you should sustain your attention without interruptions or deviation throughout the day, alternating between your focus on breathing, body postures, and objects. Chapter 7. Body Observation Vipassana. I love these pronunciations. This is a Buddhist technique that is currently practiced in countries such as India, Sri Lanka, etc. One of the variants practiced in Burma, according to an old tradition revived by S.M. Goenka, is the one presented in this chapter. When the practitioner has managed to strengthen his attention according to the instructions of the last chapter until he is able to keep it focused for a minimum of 20 minutes without dispersions or deviations, he will be able to practice Vipassana. In this technique, the practitioner learns to feel his body, first part by part, later in its entirety, just experiencing it as a unit. Pardon me. The Vipassana practitioner is recommended to exercise this technique in the same clean, ventilated, and insect-free place in which he practices his anapana, and as a continuation of that, in other words, the practitioner will sit comfortably, close his eyes, and begin to concentrate his attention on his breathing movements until he manages to keep it fixed and without deviations. This is the preparation for Vipassana. Once the above has been achieved, and in the same posture and situation, the practitioner then directs his attention to the top of his head, the vertex, and keeps it there until he feels some sensations in that area. The sensation can be tactile, vibratory, tickling, temperature, or any other type. Once the above is achieved, the practitioner pays attention to the sensations that exist around the vertex. Just go through the entire upper part of the head. Using the same technique, the forehead, neck, ears, cheeks, eyes, nose, mouth, and neck are covered until the entire head is complete without leaving any area untouched and felt. The quality of the sensation does not matter. The important thing is that no blind areas are left. When one of these is found, attention must remain on it until some sensation, whatever it may be, is awakened. According to Goenka, quote, pain sensations must be observed with the same equanimity and detachment than those of pleasure. Once the head has been recognized, the same technique is practiced with men, arms, hands, back, chest, belly, hips, buttocks, genitals, thighs, legs, feet, and fingers until the entire body is covered. The journey is repeated over and over again, activating blind spots and observing all the sensations that occur with detachment and equanimity. Little by little, we try to feel the body's unity until we observe and feel the body as a complete unit. End quote. Quoted from Goenka in 1984 via personal communication. One of the ways to achieve the above is to unify parts already covered. For example, after observing all the parts in the head, it is observed as a unit without, at the same time, losing the observation of all its parts. Next, the same is done with the entire back after having covered all its parts. Pardon me. Yay! The unity of the head and the back are unified, perceiving them as complete and simultaneous in a new act of observation. Little by little, all the parts are unified without losing any detail, until the unified and simultaneous observation of each and every one of them is achieved. In reality, what we're doing is activating and decanting algorithms that become increasingly more inclusive until the algorithm for unifying the entire body image is activated, which is observed. Observed? Yes. The observation of bodily unity must be maintainable in everyday life. In addition to this vipassana of the surface of the body, it is also necessary to observe the internal organs. For her, after covering the entire body surface, we proceed to focus our attention on the interior starting with the head region. A practical procedure to do the above consists of placing your attention in a circle perpendicular to the body axis. The entire surface of the circle is covered, first in the highest area of the skull, and little by little as it is made to penetrate through the brain, maintaining observation of its entire surface. The circle is lowered, gradually covering the entire body, like a hula hoop descending over you. Another procedure consists of penetrating a few millimeters. I added that last bit, by the way. Another procedure consists of penetrating a few millimeters at a time into each area of observation of the surface in each tour of this entire area. In each tour, attention is paid, tours and TOUR, attention is paid to the most deeply located sensations until the entire interior of the body can be explored. The body unification algorithm, to be complete, must include both the surface and the interior of the body. Vipassana, in addition to preparing the aspirant for self-reflective meditation, has an immediate effect of deep body cleansing, healing of ailments, pain and illness, and their prevention. Above all, it strengthens the capacity for observation, attention, and awareness by awakening the dormant sensations of the blind areas. Buddhism considers these areas of ignorance, so their revival means eliminating this ignorance, thus expanding consciousness. With this preparation underway, we are ready to carry out the next step, which is the observation of the mind. We'll pause it there. The Chapter 8, Observation of the Mind. The mind does not exist as a concrete, independent entity, nor as a bounded object separate from other objects. When talking about the mind, there is no reference to the existence of a materialized mass that has sensible attributes such as color, shape, texture, or location somewhere in space. Rather, it refers to a dynamic process that manifests itself in the form of thoughts, memories, and images. For her, the observation of the mind is the observation of its contents. In the context of self-illusion meditation, the observation of the contents of the mind is carried out until the subject of the experience is able to observe the origin, maintenance, and disappearance of any thought, memory, or image without identifying with them. That is, until the subject of the experience becomes the observer of the mind. The best way to achieve the above is to adopt the same meditation posture as in Anapana and Vipassana, but paying attention to the observer. When detached observation of spontaneous mental contents is achieved, the next step is to voluntarily activate a thought or image, observing its origin, maintenance, and disappearance without identifying with them, just as if they were an external object. The detailed procedure to achieve all of the above will be described in the following sections. Firstly, observation of spontaneous thoughts. Yeah, they're the fun ones. Sitting comfortably and with back straight, Anapana and then Vipassana are done until the observation of the body unity is achieved using the same procedure described earlier in this book. Once the above is achieved, attention is directed towards any thoughts that arise spontaneously. The content of thought can vary in an infinite degree of possibilities. It can be about the meaning of what is being done, about the achievements obtained, about some memory referring to some plan or in relation to some new idea, etc., etc. In any case, thought is allowed to flow without value judgments and without blockages. In case a judgment appears, I also observe it without repressing it. The mind is simply allowed to choose any course it wishes in order to observe the developments and deviations without identifying them with them. If no spontaneous thought appears, then a review of the sensations in the different areas of the body is carried out, paying attention to any thought that could appear when one or more points of the surface or interior of the body are activated. As the routes are repeated based on the content of the thought, its emergence can be observed with greater clarity and detail. The same will happen with its maintenance, development, and disappearance. It doesn't matter how interesting, valuable, or meaningful any thought may be. In all cases, it is observed as such without identifying it with it and independently of its contents. Then, observation of provoked thoughts. Once the above is achieved, and with a mind calm, a thought arises in the same way as before. You observe it by paying attention to its appearance, development, and disappearance. Observing it as a thought without identifying with its content, the process continues until any thought can appear at will, observing it as if it were an external object. The important thing about the process is to ensure that the identification of the subject of the experience with its contents is transferred to the identification with the observer, who remains equanimous and faithful to his own nature regardless of what contents of the experience appear. Then, observation of memories. Every point and area of the body contains memories. Vipassanic attention causes these memories to be evoked. The observer exists independent of the contents of his observation. The detached observation of spontaneous or provoked thoughts and memories activates the unification of the totality of mental contents in the unity of the observer. The described procedure will allow the subject of the experience to better know his personal history and understand the origin of their conditions. Until this real knowledge is achieved, the experience of reality will oscillate between identification with the contents of the mind and localization in the observer as such. The process of going through the contents of the mind and the appearance of memories has several stages in which each time a master scheme or pattern will appear with greater clarity as the subtext of the entire personal history. When this scheme appears, it must also be the subject of observation without identifying with it. This will allow achieving a kind of salto in which the meditator will approach his true nature as reality and the observer, and not as the subject of the experience, although in reality both are the same. And then simultaneous observation of thoughts. Simultaneous observation of thoughts. The spontaneous or provoked appearance of thoughts may or may not be linear. Inclusive several thoughts can appear together in sequence or in the absence of it. In all cases, they are thoughts that must be observed as such without identification with their contents. A thought about the nature of the mind may occur simultaneously with a judgment about some event in one's history. The meditator must be able to observe any of the thought contents regardless of their greatness or baseness as mere thoughts without identifying with them. Even the thoughts of not identifying with them must be observed as a thought. The mind has been conceptualized as a lake, and thoughts are like the waves of it. The observer's position allows you to observe the lake and its waves from a witness perspective without identifying with them. In order to observe all the content of the mind, it will be necessary to strengthen the attention of the observation of isolated thoughts, and then proceed to the simultaneous observation of an increasing number of thoughts, unifying them as what they are, different contents of the same unit of which the observer is the detached witness. For her, the meditator will activate voluntarily several simultaneous thoughts, observing them all at the same time in the same way in which He proceeded to observe the bodily unit after attending to each of its parts. The unification of thoughts can be done gradually, one by one, and later attending to several simultaneously until achieving a unified mastery of observer of all. The same procedure for observing thoughts will apply to any other content of the mind, especially for the internal images that arise from it. The image activation technique will be explained below. The observation of internal images can be done before, after, or simultaneously with the observation of thoughts. This is image observation. Memories or any other content of the mind. The best way to see an internal image is to locate some point or illuminated area within the dark panorama that appears when you close your eyes. When one of the peak egos is located, I love how he terms that, the meditator must concentrate all of his attention on it, waiting for its structure to begin to unfold before his mind's eye until it appears as an internal image. The brain is continually active. Billions of neural processes occur every moment. Whether these processes manifest themselves in the form of images, thoughts, or any other form depends on factors such as personal history, genetic makeup, and training. For the meditator interested in the reality of the observer and not in the identification with its contents, the specific quality of these is secondary. Training in the observation of internal images allows them to be contemplated as contained in the observer unit and not as identification elements. When attention is maintained on some luminous point of the internal visual field, the point attended to will be transformed into an internal image, which can be observed, perceiving its emergence, maintenance, evolution, and disappearance as if it would be a thought. For those for whom internal images arise spontaneously, the process of observing them is similar to that of the observation provoked by a luminous point. In both houses, they will be attended to by observing their emergence, development, and disappearance, remembering that they are contents of the mind and without identifying with them. Observation can continue until the meditator manages to observe several images, simultaneous or sequential, without losing your position as an observer of them. And then simultaneous observation of images, memories, and thoughts. Lastly, we will proceed to carry out a free and simultaneous observation of any content of the mind, regardless of its quality, characteristics, remaining as a witness of them until achieving an observation of the unity of thought and image and of any other content of the mind. Okay. I'm going to have a break. Chapter 9. The Observation of Emotions. We only need 2 more steps to be able to describe the technique of self-illusion meditation, which are the observation of the emotional components of our psyche, call these feelings or simply emotions, and the observation of patterns. The latter will be dealt with in the next chapter. Observing emotions is difficult because we almost always identify with our emotional states. So detached observation of them is a challenge. Something similar happens to us as happens with our social role. It is relatively easy to identify with it, especially because society constantly imposes that identification on us. But in the same way that the social role is a game and never our real identity, so our emotions, like our thoughts, can be observed from a platform that is equanimous, detached, and not identified with its contents of observation. From this platform, emotions and thoughts are seen passing by, as if they were passing by themselves. Alan Watts describes it very well when he says, "It feels like everything is me, or as if everything, including my own thoughts and actions, is happening by itself. End quote. Quote reference here from Psychotherapy of the East, Psychotherapy of the West, talk in Barcelona, Spain, in 1973. Back into the content. A practical way to observe emotions is to contemplate their bodily effects one by one. In other words, doing body vipassana during emotional activation. This dissected observation empowers us to make an equanimous and detached observation of the emotion itself. It is advisable to dissect the bodily effects and observe the unified emotion simultaneously. For her, it is suggested to capture the moment in which an emotion begins, immediately observing the bodily changes that accompany it. These may consist of alterations in heart rate, changes in respiratory depth and frequency, movements and sensations in the stomach and intestines, changes in muscle tension, etc. It is advisable to take a body tour observing all the changes that accompany the emotion. This observation should be made without judgment or criticism, but rather in an equanimous, neutral state. I should learn how to pronounce that more correctly. After the above and in successive steps, it is advisable to unite the sensations until a unified observation of all the bodily alterations during the emotion is achieved. Once the above is done, a direct observation of the emotion as a feeling in itself can be attempted without dissections or partial observations. Finally, it is advisable to attempt a simultaneous observation of the emotion itself and of the accompanying body components. As direct emotional observation and contemplation of its bodily components are exercised, mastery will be acquired in this exercise, which results in emotional fluidity without repression and the equanimous observation of it without identifications. At the same time, this technique brings about emotional cleansing and the ability to remain unified without losing center during emotional processes. It is convenient to learn to identify different emotions and discover their dynamics, causes, and triggering stimuli. Knowing of our emotional being, its processes and conditioning leads to a healthier and more fluid life. The sustained observation of emotional changes and the discovery of their dynamics helps us to be masters of ourselves on a much more total and profound level than usual. Little by little, as it is exercised more, emotional observation leads to the achievement of a state of greater power and in which emotions enrich personal life without causing confusion or tearing, and intense suffering, but rather accompanying the experiences, nuanced them of meaning and life. It is not about making emotions disappear, but rather about enriching them by giving them a place they deserve and preventing them from controlling or confusing us. Although acceptance is essential to be successful in observing any experience for the contemplation of emotions, it is a sine qua non requirement. Emotional states must be accepted in order to be observed as they really are. Emotional repression or the fear of facing an emotional state will make any attempt to self-reflective meditation fail. On the other hand, learning to accept emotional states will guarantee the success of meditation, since every algorithmic attempt requires truthful information, and this can only be obtained by accepting it. Chapter 10. The observation of patterns. Once all of the above has been achieved, there is only one more step left to begin the practice of self-illusion meditation. Since this technique implies the capacity for algorithmization, the practice of self-illusion is strengthened if algorithmic exercises are performed prior to its implementation. These exercises will be described in this chapter and consist of observing patterns. Nature offers a multitude of shapes supported by patterns. From the leaf of a tree, with the arrangement of its lines, to the regular waves of sand dunes and the whitish patterns of clouds, pattern observation consists of sustaining attention to any object, trying to discover among its forms some regular arrangement that constitutes a pattern. You could start the exercise by carefully observing a flower or a tree leaf. The longer the sustained observation time and the more patterns that are discovered, the better. Plant forms can be observed with the naked eye or with the help of magnifying glasses or microscopes, depending upon the facilities available and one's own interest levels. Every time a pattern is identified, an algorithm is activated. Algorithmic development occurs when patterns that increase their complexity are identified. Therefore, a speed that has been able to carefully and continuously observe the pattern of a leaf or the regular arrangement of the parts of a flower, it is recommended to proceed with more complex arrangements such as the shapes of clouds, surfaces of lakes or the sea, the shape of rocks, etc. The observation of llamas and their shapes represents excellent practice, especially when patterns can be perceived from their movements and complex morphologies. Observing dynamic and changing patterns strengthens the ability to natural algorithmic decoding of the living and interacting system with the environment. One of the observation practices most used by shamans is contemplation of the starry sky. Recognizing star patterns is widely recommended as preparation for self-reflective meditation. Chapter 11. Self-elusive meditation. Once all of the above has been done, we are prepared to practice self-illusion meditation. The meditator is suggested to sit comfortably in a place he has chosen for all previous practices or in any other quiet, ventilated place free of insects. With eyes closed and back straight, self-reflective meditation begins by strengthening attention, concentrating on the entry and exit of airflow into the lungs during breathing. This should be rhythmic, slow, and calm. This anapana practice is continued until you manage to keep your attention focused on the respiratory movements and the sensations caused by the air when it passes through the nostrils and enters the body, and then again when it leaves, paying attention to all the details of the process. Once attention has been strengthened and there have been no distractions from a single respiratory movement for a few minutes, attention is moved to the vertex or top of the head to feel the bodily sensations that exist at that point there, and from there begin to travel the body in the practice of vipassana. During both anapana and vipassana, any thoughts that may arise during the practice are neither repressed nor diverted. He simply allows himself to freely occur, observing them with placidity, equanimity, and without identifying with them. The vipassanic body journey is continued until there are no blind spots in any area of the body. When you reach this point, and you can travel through the entire body without blockages, you proceed to link your breathing with the journey in the following way. When you inhale, you travel through the body from your feet to your head. And when you exhale, you travel through the body in reverse, head to feet. This journey up and down in a respiratory rhythm is continued until you begin to feel the whole body as a unit. At that moment, the dynamic journey is interrupted, and instead of the body as a unit, I don't know if there's something missing there, continues on an intermediate practice that helps achieve the observation of bodily unity is to go unifying the body part by part during the initial journey. When the body is observed as a unit, the simultaneous contemplation of the respiratory movements is added to this observation until the body and the breath form a new unit of observation. Once the above has been achieved, we proceed to observe the contents of the mind. To do this, the observation of the body and breathing is momentarily interrupted and attention is directed towards the mind observing its contents. Thoughts are observed with equanimity, without identifying with them until we are able to contemplate how they originate, develop, and fade away. This practice is continued until we are able to perceive all of the mental contents that can be observed and their origin of the luminous mirror of the mind. And their origin in the luminous mirror. When the above is achieved, then the observation of the mind is added to that of the unified body and the breath, achieving a new unity of body, the mind, and the respiratory movements. After the above, attention focuses on emotions, abandoning momentarily observing the unity of body, mind, and breath. Emotions are first observed, and as such, without dissecting their visceral and vegetative components, and then paying attention to the bodily changes that accompany them. Any emotion that arises spontaneously is observed with equanimity, without judging, analyzing, or qualifying it. In the same way that any thought is allowed to flow without repression or deviations, emotions are allowed to flow until we are able to observe them along with all their bodily changes without identifying with them. Once the above is achieved, the emotions, their bodily changes, the mind and its thoughts, the body and the breath are simultaneously observed in a new unity that incorporates them all. To this observation of the unity and of all the components of experience that can be contemplated are called observation of the totality of oneself in the present. Obviously, this observation of totality is not of the totality of the entire universe, but only of what is possible at that present. The observation of the totality of oneself in the present is self-elusive meditation in its components. The next step in the technique consists of observing the result of the union of all the elements of oneself in the sense of sameness or self. As in the observation of emotions as such, and in the dissected observation of the bodily, visceral, and vegetative components that accompany them, self-elusive contemplation of oneself consists of the dissected observation of all the components of the experience susceptible to be observed and the observation of the unified resultant. It is recommended that the meditator, achieve mastery in the observation of the components before attempting the observation of the unified self. When the observation of the unified self can be carried out directly, it is advisable from time to time to make a careful review of the components of the experience by observing them in order to correct and enrich the inclusion algorithms resulting from the unification. Self-reflective meditation can be strengthened by practicing it during daily life without the need for special schedules or secluded places, incorporating in the observation not only the components that I have indicated, but also the sensory elements and the visual and auditory precepts. Self-illusion meditation that incorporates the visual and auditory world in the observation of unity brings the meditator closer to the observation of reality, which is the true objective and goal of self-illusion meditation. In contemporary physics, the algorithm that manages to describe a very dynamic system complex, it is called a strange attractor. If we assume that the strange attractor exists in the brain, these could be considered as the guides of the system during the self-elusive process. Imagine the reader, one of the moments in which a person's name is momentarily forgotten, and when you want to remember it, you have the feeling that the forgotten name is, so to speak, on the tip of your tongue. Somehow, for the consciousness in search of the name, the sensation and the search, it would seem to be guided precisely by a strange attractor. The search ends, and the system reaches equilibrium when the strange attractor becomes the remembered name algorithm. Something similar happens in self-elusive meditation, in which the existence of a guide or strange attractor that literally attracts the system towards the algorithmic decoding, but not of a name, but of the total and real state of the subject in a given present. If this attractive guide did not exist, self-illusion would not be possible. It is as if the system contained its future state of development and attracted itself to it. Since the state that is activated with self-illusion meditation is that of contact with reality, and it always exists, the strange attractor that guides self-illusion is this omnipresent, all-encompassing, and all-knowing reality. This reality is that of the observer. In esoteric Christianity, the observer is represented as an eye inside of the triangle. The triangle represents a Christian trilogy. The observer eye is what unifies the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The secret of the Christian trilogy and what unifies it is the observer. Many of the log shaman lineages of Mexico have incorporated this symbol and deeply venerate it. In Hinduism, there is a trilogy, that of Krishna, Vishnu, and Shiva, the creator, the sustainer, and destroyer. This trilogy is contained in the being, Purusha, Atman, which is untouchable and remains immovable regardless of the changes that the universe undergoes. That is, it occupies a place similar to that of the observer. In India, it is said that the being is not burned by fire, water is not wet, nor can any weapon hurt it. The objective of self-illusion meditation is precisely the encounter with the reality of the observer and the self through algorithmic activation of increased inclusive power. As we have seen, this technique consists of observing the entirety of oneself in the present. This totality is the unity of all log processes that coexist at a given moment. With constant practice, this observation of the totality of oneself is achieved effortlessly. Self-illusion is the observation of the characteristic state from a perspective free of identifications. It is seeing oneself from a transcendent and simultaneously neutral position. In this verse, the subject approaches himself free of content because the observation is not intellectual or even logical, but rather direct and total. As we already saw, to achieve unification, we produce little by little, uniting various aspects. First of all, bodily sensations, after thoughts and emotions. In other words, first we proceed with the Anapana and Vipassana technique until the unification of the body image is achieved. Then we proceed to do the same with thoughts and ideas until all the emotional components of the present are incorporated into the same unit. The unification of all experiences into one produces a sense of identity of the totality of oneself in the present. This ego sensation is the content of the self-illusion, in which the present self proceeds to observe itself. With practice and gradual unification of all spheres of experiences becomes unnecessary because the meditator becomes capable of identifying his selfhood and observing it directly. Then we go on to chapter 12, permanent and unlimited self-elusive meditation. When self-illusion is achieved without intermediate sequences, the next step in practice is to maintain self-illusion observation permanently. For her, it is necessary to strengthen focused attention that prevents distraction and maintains observation during daily life. Self-reflective meditation should not be confused with analytical contemplation or an activation of critical thinking and judgments. The permanent self-referring meditator always remembers who he is and remains alert, avoiding identifying with the contents of his experience. He simply observes himself referring to himself. When self-illusion is achieved, the experience of selfhood is transformed. In contemporary physics, it is known that the observer participates and modifies his objects of observation. In the same way, the subject who observes the totality of himself in the present transforms this totality, since he incorporates into it the new element of his self-illusion. The new totality of the self thus obtained can be observed again by self-referring to it. This new self-illusion once again modifies the totality, and so on. When self-illusion meditation continues in this dynamic process of sustained self-illusion, it is called without limit. Permanent self-illusion meditation without limit can be continued until the moment in which the system fails to unify into a new sensation of self-illusion that can be algorithmized and therefore susceptible to being observed and self-alluded to. The algorithmization of the totality of the present is the sensation of self-illusion, egoic. 2 or 3 self-illusions of the transformed egoicity can lead the system to an informational density of such great caliber that the decantation of its algorithm needs a relatively long time to be achieved. If observation is maintained during this algorithmic search, later or more, early on the subject will be able to unify in a sensation of selfhood that can be observed. There comes a moment in which permanent self-illusion meditation without limits leads the subject to a place themselves in their own identity in unity with the rest. In conclusion, permanent and unlimited self-illusion meditation is the ability to observe the totality of oneself at all times without identifications with any of its contents, maintaining and remembering reality with a capital R. Chapter 13. Final considerations. There is no limit to observation. Even in moments in which it is not possible to refer to oneself, this inability can be observed. It is possible to observe one's own confusion and contemplate one's own forgetfulness. Even in moments of maximum emptiness and deep depression, the observer remains. The ability to remember that can always be observed is the ability to maintain a state of optimism, faith, and hope in life and its meaning, no matter how terrible mental suffering may be, or is, no matter how deep the confusion, displeasure, or grief may be. The observer remains pure, untouched, and totally self-sufficient in its own capacity. The existence of the observer is the foundation of true faith. The last consideration that I dare to suggest before finishing this book is the recommendation to remember that you can observe. The strengthening of this memory and its application at all times will ensure that any human being becomes increasingly self-possessed, optimistic, and aware there is always a next step. On to the appendix, the observer and the lattice. One of the most interesting aspects about the conception of lattice is its great similarity to the properties of the observer. Both the observer and the lattice are a singularity, and both are non-dependent constructs from which diverse manifestations are generated in an infinite number. Regardless of the appearance of any elementary particle and all chemical compounds and objects in the universe, The lattice is preserved as a unique and singular substance in the same way the observer is unique and singular regardless of the contents of your experience. According to these analogies, one could think that what we call the lattice is the observer itself. This would be in accordance with what the experience of identity of the observer with the subject of the experience. When the latter's brain and its neuronal field reach higher coherence, in a state of high coherence, the neuronal field mimics the fundamental state of the lattice. So the identity between lattice and observer is also based on a physiological, physical, and phenomenological point. According to these considerations, the fundamental state is the active silence of the observer and never the absence of consciousness in a hypothetical passive nothingness. The state of silence is so longed for by seekers is of the essential state of being, is therefore not the absence of consciousness of an absolute mental void, but the consciousness, self-sufficient and vital, of the pure self and reality. Finally, despite all of the previous analogies, there is evidence to suggest that the observer cannot be reduced to the lattice, nor that the lattice is in itself the observer. This evidence contained in the behavior of Mexico's greatest shaman, Pachita. Pachita was capable of materializing objects and making things disappear, demonstrating almost total control over the lattice. If the observer were the lattice itself, this control would be impossible. Somehow, Pachita managed to distort the lattice until it acquired the same conformation and structure as an object, and it then appeared. Presumably, this behavior was a result of the characteristics of Pachita's neuronal field in interaction with the lattice and its voluntary management. This management is irreducible to the lattice. Therefore, the observer is not the lattice, but transcends it. The observer as reality cannot be reduced to any physical model or to any explanation or thought that is even more inclusive. The observer transcends the lattice and the mind and belongs to the self. Such is signed off by Crucio, Baja California, June 13, 1987. Then it goes into the glossary, which is, like I mentioned at the start, you've probably been looking at the screenshots of that, and then it ends in Grinberg, Zilberbaum, the Shamans of Mexico, Albuquerque, in Peg, Mexico, in press. The end. Ta-da! And that, my friends, if you are first coming in contact with him, is the infamous Jacabo Grinberg, Zilberbaum. And yeah, what a fascinating conceptual individual this is. I have a completely new and different approach of understanding what and who we are, and I was blown away when I found that somebody was running along exactly my own assumptions. He's just got much better words to put to it, and has been doing it for longer than I have, obviously. But that's cool, because that means he's helping me leg my up, so I can help you leg your up, so we can leg up the rest of everybody around here and get ourselves out of this collective cesspool we find ourselves in. Enjoy your day. Don't forget, my friends, be self-elusive in your meditation. Mwah.